Hello, hello. Thank you, anyone tuning in. I always appreciate people listening to this podcast. We have a lot of fun with it. It's part of my recovery program today. It's just something I do extra to try and reach out to other people and stay sober. I'm super excited about today. I have my friend on today, Kelly C. She's awesome. I asked her to come on because she works a solid program. I get to see that each week in some meetings that we attend together, and I asked her to come on. She said yes, and I was super excited about it. Thank you so much, Kelly, for coming on. Do you want to give us just kind of brief overview of how you got started in your addiction, kind of how it progressed in the beginning, stuff like that?
Sure. But first, I think we have a birthday in the house. So I got you a little cupcake with a four. We're going to sing happy birthday.
I love it.
So happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Drew. Happy birthday to you.
Yes, I love it. Thank you, Kelly.
You're
I
welcome.
love it. Yeah, today was my 4 years, and Kelly had just recently. She's a little bit ahead of me, so she had her 4 years
All right, make
recently. So,
make a wish. I'll blow it out.
perfect. Got it.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it.
No problem. So, yeah, my name's Kelly. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict too, for those who are listening. I also have other drugs of choice. I'm also dual diagnosed. I'm bipolar. And yeah, Drew and I connected on a meeting that we both frequent. And I reached out to you. It's funny because, uh, I mean, I have a circle of both, right? Co-ed. But for me, I don't hear a lot of men that are leading and that are super involved. And I heard your share for the first time, like, this guy's so cool. So I reached out to you, wanted to connect, and I just think it's cool to have trudging buddies. So that's how you and I connected, like you had said. So yeah, like you had mentioned, I have a little over 4 years, and for me, you know, the drinking and using started in 2011. I was 26, and for whatever reason, I started to drink heavily. Right? I don't think when you first start drinking, or when I first started drinking, there was ever an indication that something was wrong. I just like to party. I like to drink a lot, and I think the funny thing is that everybody drinks a lot. Like you go out, everybody gets hammered, and it's just the thing to do. It wasn't until probably more like 2015 when I started to realize that people could turn an off switch, right? They party, and then the next day they go to work. And I'm like, I go home at 3 a.m., I start drinking again, and I continue the party, and I don't go to work, or I go to work, and then I leave work to go have a Bloody Mary, and then I never go back to work, right? There's like these patterns of drinking, and it becoming something that doesn't seem so normal anymore.
Yeah, and I always found that like interesting. It's like in the beginning, it's something that started off as so much fun because it has to pull us in somehow. It's like I would say probably, and I've kind of touched on this before. I would say I had like 2 years for me where like I super enjoyed it. Alcohol and other stuff was like adding to my life. I had some minor consequences, early on, but I would say that what alcohol kind of did for me in the beginning, and that just illusion of like having tons of fun and such like a social lubricant, they call it. It made any time with friends or going out, it just made it a little bit more fun. And but it's interesting because it just started to kind of take a turn, and it's like, and you know how it is. Was there a point where you kind of realized that, like, you know what, maybe this is a bigger issue than I've thought previously?
The crazy thing is that the word insidious keeps coming to mind. It's so insidious that I didn't think there was. I was so deep in it that I thought it was normal to not want to go out socially. I didn't understand girls getting together for lunch and for dinners, and pedicures and shopping together. And my disease had, I was like in this bubble, and I thought that everything was normal. um I guess to a certain extent. I remember one time, I used to, so I was so absent, right, as a daughter and a sister and everything, throughout some of my addiction. And so I remember, buying extravagant gifts and everything like that. And one year for Christmas, I bought my mom a big screen TV, and she kind of looked at me, and my twin looked at me a little funny, and they're like, "We don't know why you're doing this. We just want you to be happy." And it was like at that moment, it was like they know I'm not happy. The curtain has been pulled back. They kind of understand what's happening, and from that moment on, I think I did have an understanding, that what I was doing wasn't just heavy drinking, right? The moderate drinker, the heavy drinker. It had become something more than that. It was those little things that my family started to say that I started to realize. And then, of course, the drinking throughout the day, you know, falling asleep or passing out was my experience, right? And then, it was like one or two, and you're shaky, and you start to drink, right? That's like the kind of things that are the obvious things that make you feel like you have a real problem.
And did you start? I remember you mentioned your previous job and stuff. Were they starting to catch on a little bit? Like,
So it's so funny that you asked that. So Wells Fargo, it's almost like, I worked for Wells Fargo for 8 years, and that's what brought me out to LA. And you could consider when I was working at Wells Fargo that I was just the cool, like, heavy drinker. Nobody, I don't think there was anybody that was really saying anything like worried about me, right? Like, it wasn't any of my colleagues that were saying something's wrong. They just knew that I like to drink and I like to party. I think also, because I had such a good um, reputation with Wells Fargo. I had been with them for so long. I do a really good job at my work that nobody really questioned. It wasn't until I went into private banking, that people started to notice. I was losing a lot of weight. I was very underweight. I was doing weird things. The behaviors start to come through. I would, oh gosh, I mean, this is the real obvious. I had gone one time. I was at Union Bank, and I had partied all night, and I came to work, and I was so shaky, and I walked to the hotel next to me, and I got a Bloody Mary, and I never ended up going back, and they found me in my car, right? So it's like the things up until those specific situations, right, where people find you drunk or intoxicated. But before that, yes, I mean, my behaviors, I mean, I acted like somebody who had a problem. I did weird things. I showed up at weird hours of the night. It was just, people were talking.
yeah. And did you end up going to treatment? How did you start off your recovery?
I did. So for one, the funny thing is about all of this is that I try to recall as much as possible. I was so intoxicated, it's hard for me to understand or remember certain times. I just pull out what I remember, right? So it's like little snippets of how I felt, when I felt them, and what happened, right? So there was times throughout, let's say, the last 5 years. So my sobriety date is March 26th of 2020. And so from about 2015 to 2020, like, right, like 5 years, there was a number of times where I was down and out. There was times where, you're having withdrawals, you feel like you're lost, you don't know where to turn. And so I remember, like, I'd watch the show Intervention, and they'd have a number at the very end, and I would literally call it, like, after the episode. I'm like, I need help. There was a time where I was at a coffee shop, and I heard people talking about drinking, and I think I was really hungover. And I remember reaching out to the lady, and I said, hey, I said, I have a problem. Do you know where I can get help? They were from Biat Chuva. So I walked over to Biat Chuva, and there was like, so that's a roundabout. Like, there was many times where I had entertained the idea of getting help. One time I had done an intake, and they were gonna have a bed for me in Long Beach residential. And it's funny, you do this paperwork, you have this intake, you talk to the people, and they're so motivated. And I'm so motivated on my end. I can't wait. I'm going to do this. I let all my family know I'm not going to be around for Christmas. I'm going into treatment. And then the day before, all of a sudden, self will, Kelly gets into the picture. Your disease tells you you're okay, that there's some business that you have to attain, to do before you go in. And so there were so many times where I had reached out to help, and it just wasn't my time. And so in 2019, um, I was on a bed. I had gone on a vodka bender. It was like a 7-day vodka bender, and I told you this and shared this with you. I fell down on my face first, my nose, busted my lips, and I cracked a tooth. And I think the combination of being so intoxicated and having such an embarrassing physical mark, I was like, this is it. Like, no more screwing around here. And so I reached out to Tarzana Treatment Center, and I ended up going to treatment for 60 days in 2000, end of 2019.
See, and isn't that interesting? Like the heat's on you, like you're starting to experience like consequences in almost every area a lot of times of our life, at least I did. And so I start to entertain, like, you know what, like maybe there's a different way, like just maybe. This is like in the beginning when I'm just starting to get like a tiny seed of like hope for some change, and so I find a treatment center, and I go as far as like showing up there and doing the intake, like you said, which takes like what? It feels like 5 hours when you're detoxing. They ask you all those questions, and it's so interesting that you talk about like all of a sudden and you're texting family members, hey, look, I'm not going to be around for this long. I'm going into treatment, this and that. They're super excited. And then, that obsession of the mind, that gets you the day before. It's like, you've already put in all this effort. You were like gung ho ready to like make a change. And all of a sudden the day before, and I can't tell you how many times that happened to me, and then it's like, I would take that first drink and kind of all bets were off. Can you kind of, touch on, you did it really well the other day at the meeting, but can you kind of just touch on like how that first drink affects you, as an alcoholic?
Yeah. So for me, people say, they drink to get drunk, and yeah, I get that, all that stuff. I never had any thought process behind the first. I just drank. I'm a drinker. I'm an alcoholic. I never recall ever thinking, I'm gonna get wasted tonight. It's like I just start and I don't stop. And what that looks like is, for me, I didn't know at the time that the whole way in which alcoholics process alcohol is different than normal people, right? My twin sister is not an alcoholic. It's funny, my when I was doing my amends to my dad and his girlfriend, they both kind of said the same thing. They both kind of, I made their amends, and they were both, happy and everything. And they had said, we just don't get it. We don't get it. They have a drink, right? Sipping on whatever tequila or whatever their drinks of choices were. We sip, and as soon as we start to get some people call it a head change or a buzz, that they stop. And it was the first time I ever thought, I don't drink like that. That's not, I don't, I don't process alcohol. I don't drink and then start to, my mind doesn't start to tell me you're getting buzzed, slow down, right? I never remember ever having that type of mentality. So I knew I was different. And I didn't know exactly how I was different until I did my first step, and I listened to Joe and Charlie, and they talk about how, as an alcoholic, when I take the first drink, there's enzymes, right? And I'm only quoting this based off of, I just had a little class, and I recall exactly, but I'm not a chemist or anything like that, or a doctor. But from what I gather is that when an alcoholic takes a drink, their enzymes are insufficient to process. There's a deficiency or quantity that happens in alcoholics where we can't process the alcohol as quick. And what happens is, the acetone creates a phenomenon of craving. As the normal drinker, they process it and it becomes like a simple carbohydrate. More or less, they feel the buzz. I don't. I drink and the craving kicks off, and when I have one drink, it makes me want to have another one and another one, and the crazy thing about it is that it's not just let's have back to back drinks. It intensifies. So when I start, I don't even know that I am powerless once I take the first drink. And it's kind of cliche, right? One drink is too much and a thousand's never enough. It's exactly how it is. When I start, if it's if it's within my power, unless somebody somehow stops me, I don't stop when I start. And that's how my drinking has always been.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, and I was always geared towards like changing my drinking behavior, like focused on the end of the night, like I would look, I'd have these like nights that were just a disaster, not even just nights, weeks, months, years, whatever, and it's like I always had this aim, of how I was going to improve my drinking. Like, I need to make sure that I don't take that shot at the end of the night. Like if I just didn't take that tequila shot at the end of the night, I'd be okay. If I didn't go to pick up drugs after 6, 7 beers, I'd be okay. And my focus was never on that first drink. I never realized that like I had it mixed up. I had to do some things to avoid that first drink rather than like the things I was adding at the end of the night.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because I was going to ask you, so you went to treatment and were you introduced to AA right away or had you heard of it before? How did you get involved with AA?
Honestly, so when I was in treatment, so I believe there are treatment facilities that are AA correlated, but because of some of our traditions, like a lot of I remember my mom saying, "Why didn't you work the steps in treatment?" And the answer is I didn't know. I didn't know. Literally for 60 days I was in, they call it a day room, right? And there was the 12 steps and 12 traditions. I wasn't listening to people. There was a one girl who had a sponsor. We had like 6 girls. It was a big treatment facility. There's like 150 clients.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
it was huge. It's really big. Yeah. And so I had 6 girls in my room. And this one girl was talking about how she got a sponsor. And I was like, okay, whatever that means. And the funny thing is after she said she got a sponsor, it was followed up by she's going to take us to go get ice cream after we go to a meeting. And so in my mind, right, my twisted, sick mind was like, these girls only have sponsors because they want to get ice cream, because everybody wants to get off campus, right? Like everybody just wanted to go have fun. And so I'm thinking they're using these sponsors as scapegoats to get out. And like I just didn't hear any message or recovery, and it was there. I just didn't hear it. Um, so in terms of AA, honestly, I think that there had been seeds that had been planted. I think I, from what I recall, I heard people telling me to go to meetings. I don't remember Alcoholics Anonymous. Not until I started going to meetings did I start to hear the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it really wasn't until, up until March 26th of 2020, I didn't really hear much about Alcoholics Anonymous. This is crazy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what was your kind of your experience in the beginning? When you started going to those meetings in the beginning, how was that?
Yeah. So March 26th, 2020, right? I show up at my twin sisters, and I had just moved from Culver City, and like a visual for you, it was like my twin sister just saying like, go get help, because I had screwed up royally the last 6 months before I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I screwed up a lot. I let this drug addict live with me. I was punching my poor mom and sisters see me with like bruised knuckles and bloody knuckles, and so she pretty much like put me in a room and said, just get help. Like, we'll leave you alone. Here's the room. Like, just do whatever you need to, right? Because this was COVID. So it wasn't about going out and finding meetings. It was on my phone and on my computer. And so I was so afraid of like I need to do something, right? I'm starting this journey. Where does it start? It starts with a meeting. And so I had this chair app, and I just remember um, going into a meeting, and I show up, and there's like, a screen full of people, and there's like, it was like a bunch of old people. And I just found out that it was like a type of meeting that it's generally like older people, but they were so nice and they welcomed me. And I said, had one day, and I asked a lady to be my sponsor because I was so scared. I did have some idea of what this thing was going to look like, because I recall being eager to just get started. And so that's what it looked like in the very beginning. I just started doing meetings one after another. Like I said, the fear of taking a drink um, and not doing something in terms of recovery based, I just kept doing meetings one after another. I feel like for the first like couple of weeks, right? And then what ended up happening is I came across a group called Tarzana Babies, and I went to Tarzana Treatment Center. It was like 3 people that were just meeting on Zoom every day at 4, and they were from Tarzana, right? So, like, talk about a strong foundation. I had people that were just like me, and they had gone to the same facility as me. So it was just easy, and it felt natural. And I was accepted, and they were my friends, and they were my trudging buddies. Like, they just became everything. And we met every day at 4 p.m. for probably the first like 6 months of my sobriety.
And that's when it starts to get enjoyable, like once you start to meet people in recovery and stuff. Because I remember in the beginning, like walking into meetings and stuff like that, like when you don't know anyone, and maybe it's like a group where there's a lot of people that are like going there every week, and they all kind of know each other. And I mean, everyone's always supportive at these places to those that are new, but it can be intimidating at first, and were you someone that was able to raise your hand and participate right away, or did it take you a while?
I don't recall. I mean, I know in the beginning that um, I was definitely nervous, but like I said, these people were more of my friends. It didn't seem like quite like a meeting setting of, a bunch of strangers. It became, like I said, it was just, I remember like within the first week, we were just like rotating, sharing our stories. And so it was like within the first week that I told my story. And for me, I think that it was easier than harder for me to speak. I think because I lived alone for 10 years, so there was very little dialogue with people. There was very little engagement that I had about how I was thinking, how I was feeling, and that was a lot in part because I didn't want to know people, and I didn't want them to know me. I had this secret life, and so I chose to, you know, block myself off and keep people out. So I think for me, which was the craziest part, is that this program gave me something I didn't know I wanted, and that was friends. And so I think that I, embraced being able to talk a little bit. I had never talked before, and then before you know it, not only is it therapeutic to hear yourself talk about your feelings and stuff, you start to hear that it's helping people, so it makes you want to do it more and more. And I think that's what the the draw is from in this program, is that the paradox is you speak to help people, it helps you, it helps them, and everybody wins. And I think that was really important for me to understand in the very beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome for people to hear, because I think, at least for me in the beginning, it was kind of like I would hear people sharing, and they were talking about their recovery program, and they seemed so far ahead of me, in a way, and so I think sometimes when you're new, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I have to say to these people? Some of these people have been sober forever, years, and it's like, but it's interesting when you start to realize it's like you never know, like the things that you need to hear at the time, you never know who it's coming from. It's like I can hear amazing stuff from someone with 30 years, and then the next person sharing could be someone with 2 days in detox, and just comes out with this real, honest, intense share, and you're like, man, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear how bad it still is out there. And I was going to ask you too, when you did your amends, and you mentioned one of your amends, which one was, like, you think the hardest to do?
My dad and his girlfriend. I when my sponsor when I asked my sponsor to sponsor me, she said, "Are you willing to go to any length to get and stay sober?" And I said yes. And so when I was driving to make my amends to, we have a there is a long history there, right? Like the whole thing in its entirety, and it was intimidating. It was scary. There was uncertainty. There was angst. Right? There's so many emotions going through you that is just so uncomfortable. Ones that I hadn't had with like my twin and my older sister. It's like the most of the people I did amends to saw me working diligent and knew how hard I was working. And so for me to make my amends to them, they almost saw the living amends part before I actually made my verbal amends. And so for my dad and his girlfriend, that wasn't the case. I didn't really have much contact with them. And so they knew bits and pieces of what I was doing, but they didn't hear it or see, any visual changes. And so they said, my sponsor said, would you go to any length to get and to stay sober? And so I remember driving to make my amends to them. And I was all of those emotions, I remember chanting, you said you'd go to any length to get and to stay sober. And it was just like this pump you up type of thing. You said you'd go to any length to get and to stay sober. And I said the serenity prayer, and I just kept doing these mantra like chants in my head to keep me in the game because I was that nervous, and this is under a year, maybe 6 months or so. And so there wasn't a lot of, more in-depth prayer. It was more of like small chanting, and the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome was doing them separate. They're so codependent, and they're just a weird couple, like I've just experienced. They're just very, obviously there's no resentment there. I've done the steps and I've worked through it, but just they're a very odd couple, and there was a lot of fear about how I was going to do it. And my sponsor kept telling me, I want, you should do them separate. Right. So that was the biggest thing, is can I do them separate? And again, right before I went in, I said, I'd go to any length to get it. And I said, Dad, can I talk to you? And I did it. And Andrew, like, it was probably one of the first times I was so present, and I was so calm at the time I was doing the amends, because my focus was on God and my focus was on the assignment at hand, which was to make an amends, nothing less or nothing more. I was so focused on being present that I heard everything that they had to say, and I said everything what I wanted to say, and how I said it kindly. I said it very precisely. I didn't go over the top, and I was just able to articulate exactly what I meant, and it was to make amends for my behavior, that I put them through all of this stuff. And so, although they were the most difficult, it ended up being some of the most gratifying amends that I made to this date.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot. It's like sometimes those ones that maybe you have these huge resentments against people that you've been thinking about for sometimes years and years, and you're able to let that go. And I always kind of talk about feeling lighter after some of the amends. I felt like I wasn't carrying around as much stress from the past, stuff like that. And I was going to ask you too, how do you kind of cope with, I would say, maybe like the destruction of the past, those maybe failed relationships, those lost jobs. If they start popping up in your head, stuff from the past, how do you deal with that today?
It's funny. So I'm going to be doing a speaking engagement, I think, on Saturday, right? And so naturally, when I'm going to speak or do some sort of a leadership, I start to think about my past, right? Like I want to think of things. not so much in a timeline, but you're thinking about, during your drinking and using days. And some of that gnarly stuff was actually coming up in a way that um, it wasn't impacting me negatively, but I thought about it in a way that I hadn't in a long time. And I think it was because of this. It was when I was thinking about it by myself, and all of this stuff, behaviors, things that I did that I'm not proud of. And it's at night, and when you're alone at night and thoughts start happening, it's like, I feel like that's the worst, right? Like, your thoughts, your mind will get the best of you. Because I wasn't in the presence of another alcoholic and I wasn't sharing it, is why it impacted me negatively. Because when I'm with a female and I'm working that fourth step, or talking about her fifth, or whatever it is, and I'm sharing my experiences, and it's the tough ones, right? It feels good because I know I'm helping another female alcoholic, because that's the relatability person. That's why women want to work with me, is because I am very I'm very transparent and honest with my past. So I think that it's few and far between that I have to reconcile my past. Funny thing is I just got a bunch of stuff from the IRS. So there's financial stuff that is still popping up. What I did, literally, as soon as I got it, it was three notices. I got it on Monday. I put them down. I took them all out. I put them down. The very next morning, I called the IRS. Like, I don't sit on anything, and I think because ways that I used to handle things was rectified by alcohol, I just stay on top of them. I feel like today, being sober, if things pop up from my past, I have a, a laundry list of things I could implement: prayer, sponsorship, meditation, um, you know, whatever it is. There's so many things. And in this case, it was a solution. It was to call the IRS and figure out what my payment plan, or what happened. And so I think the coolest part, and why I suggest every alcoholic who comes into these rooms work the steps, because the freedom comes from working the steps. I don't regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. It's a promise. All of those things I never want to forget, because that's what's going to give freedom to another female if I'm working with them.
And that's what's so interesting too. It's like, everything that's gone on over the years, and all of that kind of destruction stuff. It's interesting how, all of a sudden you're in recovery and you get sober, and it's like all of a sudden you have a whole new purpose. It's like it's so cool how that stuff was not just a ton of pain and emotional stress for nothing. It's like, at least you can make something out of it. At least it serves a purpose, which is now having more ammunition to relate with new people, and more ways that you can help people, and share your experience, which is awesome. I was going to ask you real quick too. You touched a little bit on mental health. For me, I'm someone that's always struggled with depression. It's I was one of those people that self-medicated, as well as just used and drank to get high. Could you talk about kind of how you figured out you were dual diagnosis? Was that something you figured out in recovery? Was that kind of from before? How does that play out?
Sure. So back in 2012, I was working for Wells Fargo, and I was getting a lot of anxiety. I was starting to use cocaine at the time, until it was a bunch of anxiety ridden, and the job in itself was very stressful. And so I remember going to get help from Kaiser. I was with Kaiser, and from 2012 until current, well, when I went to treatment in 2019, I had been clinically diagnosed bipolar 6 or 7 times. I tried to get ADHD diagnoses because I wanted my pills, and they always routed me bipolar, bipolar, every single time. Whether it was like a intake of some sort, or if it was a psychologist or a psychiatrist or whatever it is, I always got a bipolar diagnosis. The funny thing is that I even knew that, even though I was getting these diagnoses or whatever, um, I knew that it didn't make sense to take medication for being bipolar, because I was doing so many drugs and drinking so much. it didn't make sense for me to incorporate pills that would help me. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want help for this stuff. There was no wanting to address my mental health at that time. Um, you know, what happens is that for me, no matter what was happening in my life, whether it was mental health, relationships, jobs, everything, my one and only want or solution or desire was to drink alcohol. So there was no wanting to get help in any other aspect. Like it was failed relationships, work, financials, everything else. As long as I could drink Pinot Grigio or vodka, everything was right in the world, right? So back to the bipolar. So when I went into treatment, I remember it was like day one of treatment, and I ran into in treatment, and I ran into a lady, and she said, "Are you new here?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, what are you looking to get here?" And I said, "I need to find out what I suffer from." And the funny thing is I didn't even think it was alcoholism at the beginning. I wanted to know if I had anything mental that was going on. Like I wanted to finally get some help with my mental health. And I remember after I said, "I want to see a doctor, like I want help," I said, "I just want serenity and peace of mind." And so I ended up getting a psychiatrist, and she had diagnosed me bipolar, and I've been on medication ever since 2019.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And do you have any advice for those that are kind of contemplating whether there's some mental health stuff, dual diagnosis type stuff going on along with the addiction? Do you have any advice for people that are trying to figure that out?
I do. I do. I think that first and foremost, it takes sobriety, right? Because um, it's it's a convoluted kind of thing with ups and downs and whatever your drugs of choices are or drinking or whatever it is. So first sobriety, right? Get some time under your belt. And what's going to happen, again, I'm not a doctor, this is just based off of personal experience, is that when you get some time get some sobriety under your belt, um, these things start happening, whether it's, racing thoughts or OCD or angst or depression or ups or downs or highs or lows or whatever it is. And a lot of people use these. I tried to be very cautious with some of my terminology. I don't suffer from anxiety. Like a lot of people say I'm OCD, I have ADHD, and it is what it is. It's not a big deal. But if you generally or you genuinely want to get help, get some sobriety on your belt. 30, 60 days. Get a therapist, talk with them, and ask for a mental health specialist, a psychiatrist, and be open and honest with whoever you're talking to. Um, you know, your recovery is your responsibility. Your mental health, you have to advocate for your mental health. There's a lot of issues with insurance, and it's very hard to find a provider for a lot of people, especially in our world, right? In our alcoholic world, in our addiction world, is that a lot of people don't have the ability to just get a doctor and get on some medication. But the resources are there. The resources are endless. You just have to advocate for them. So if you're suffering, or you feel like there's something more other than just drinking and everything, there's tons of resources online. I Google them all the time. I don't post too much about a lot, but every once in a while during mental health awareness, I'll post something. There's all these different phone people that you can call. They can point you in the right direction. There's a lot of apps and stuff like that. And so I think the biggest part for me, or my advice or suggestion, is like, just don't give up. Don't I get emotional just because, like, don't I remember one time, like, don't settle for not feeling well. Like, mental health, it's just as important as my sobriety, because like I'll have breakthrough mania, and when your world gets turned upside down and you all of a sudden, like, I have this strong program, and I pray and I meditate, and all of a sudden this mania kicks in, and it's happened just a few times, and all of a sudden it's like you don't have any connection with any of that. And so if you're suffering, it's not normal to have this mania, all of this energy and this confusion. You don't have to settle for that kind of stuff. And so there is help. Just you just gotta look for it.
Yeah, and I love that. Thank you, Kelly. That's awesome. And I was just going to ask you. We're kind of getting towards the end here, but how do you stay connected? You've got 4 years now. Your life is obviously not where it was previous to getting sober. You've made a ton of huge changes. Got your mental health in a great spot. You're connected, family, friends. You've made your amends. You've got a sponsor. How do you continue this recovery journey? How do you stay motivated at 4 years?
It's one day at a time. You say you have a daily reprieve, which means I get to stay sober based off of what I do, right? It's my action behind what I do. The first thing is that for me, there's always a conscious contact with a higher power. It's saying, it always varies, and I'm not very good at it, but it's just simple check-ins like, I'm nothing without you. Guide me in my day. Have me hear what you will have me hear. Be who you have me be. It's those kind of check-ins, right? It's a reminder. All of this stuff that I do, like you said, I have 4 years. I've worked the steps. I've been in the book. I know our literature. These are all reminders. All these meetings and all of this stuff that I'm doing is just reminding me of where I came from and what I need to do. And so it's just being aware, right? And it's being um, aware and responsible for what my day looks like. Um, I think that for me, and the flexibility of my home life is I get to go to a lot of meetings. I'm still going to 4 to 5 meetings a day, which is excessive, right? But they're kind of, you know, they go from 7 a.m. to potentially 8 p.m., and so it's staying connected that way. And then, everything in between is just trying to be a good person. It's just trying to treat people well. If there's it's like I could give you this great lip service and say the 10 step inventory and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I just try to I go based off of the way I feel. And the way I feel is how, like, my internal dialogue is God. So if I am content and I'm at peace and I feel like I'm doing a good job, it's because I am. So I'm just listening to myself and my heart. I always say, they say in the book that the fundamental idea of God is in every man, woman, and child. So it's your core, it's my core. It's who I am as a person. So if I've made that conscious contact in the morning and I've turned my will, my life over to my higher power throughout my day, I'm guided by myself, right? Like we become one. I also got tattooed. I don't know if you can see it. So it says thy will, and then it says not mine on that. And so do I look at it that much? Yeah, it's on my forearms, and I think for me, the reason I didn't get, that I got thy will, not mine, is because that will never change. It is instilled in me, ever since I started this journey and I found out what thy will, and my self will and what the difference of it looks like. I never want that to change. Whether I drink, whether I'm sober, whatever happens, my physical time here on earth, I always want to remember that I want to be in God's will. And I think if I do that, I'll stay sober.
Yeah, and how did you were you someone that always had a higher power? Did you always have a relationship before? How did that kind of play out as you got sober?
I had, I don't think I was an atheist. I think maybe agnostic. I don't recall. I don't even remember being one of those people that prayed, like, help me get out of this, or when I was drunk, like, I'll never do it again. I don't ever remember making any statements or demands or anything like that to a God or any God. Um, so my very first, so I think it was my very first day, right? I told you I went on a chair app. I was under the impression that I needed God, a religious God. And so I reached out to my friend who is Christian, and she let me know of a Bible study that was going to be via Zoom, right? Because it's still COVID. So I went to a Zoom meeting and I went to a Bible study day one. And this Bible study, it was right before Easter, so it was talking about Jesus and being nailed to the cross. And I just remember thinking, I just don't. It's not that I didn't believe it. I just didn't understand it, and I felt like I didn't want to understand it. The 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 great thing about this thing is it's not a religious program; it's spiritual. And so all I did was when I took that first step, and I knew that there was that I suffered from something that I personally. This isn't a self-help program. They told me, if it was, if I could get help, I wouldn't need you guys, or I wouldn't need this program, right? So when I came in here and I admitted I was powerless, right? A lot of people, the last thing I wanted to do as an alcoholic or an addict is admit anything. I didn't want to admit my faults. I didn't want to admit it was my fault that I was an alcoholic, that I did these bad things. I didn't want to admit anything. So when I was educated about the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind, I'll admit anything. Like, I need your guys' help. Like, the walls were down, my eyes were open to anything and everything. Right? It's like, I need you guys. I need this. And it was such a simple yet profound step that I was like, everything I embraced from there. Right? I did step 2. My sponsor said, like, everything that I did was the simplest steps. It was so easy. She said, write a list of characteristics that you want of a best friend. We didn't even mention God. We didn't even mention higher power. She said characteristics of a best friend. So I made a list of best friend characteristics: friendly, funny, kind, understanding, loving, tolerant, patient, um, uh, empathetic, like everything perfect, right? Every perfect description you could give, I gave to my best friend. And then I did the third step prayer. And as soon as I did that third step prayer, I had probably done it a few times. I don't know if it happened on the very first time I did it. But as soon as I was able to recite the third step prayer, and I had this list of adjectives of what I wanted in his best friend, and somehow, some way, the dots connected, and I realized that I had just created a higher power of my own understanding. Getting emotional. It seemed so powerful and game changing. And you guys, I mean, I remember as soon as I found my higher power, it was like the weight was taken off. I just remember thinking, I don't have to live a life where I make all of these plans and I make all of these ideas, I do all of these things, and I fall short, and I'm a failure. It's like all of that went out the door. All of this mentality of me, myself, and I, it's only me, I trust no one, like all of that just subsided. And I just thought, there is this guiding force that you guys helped me, find. And then it was just, that was it. So the great thing, whether you are agnostic, atheist, whether you believe in a power greater than yourself, a God of your own understanding, whatever it is, and you come into this program, just just take the steps. It will unfold from there. Just work with a sponsor, get into the book, get into the literature, and take the steps. And whatever the outcome that is created will happen for you. But you got to do the steps.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Kelly. I love that. And I was going to ask you too, because you mentioned sponsoring other women. I know that you're super supportive with all the women on the meetings that we go to. How has that kind of strengthened your recovery? Having other people that you get to reach out to and kind of do your step 12 with.
You know, when you talk about quantity, like, I go to a lot of meetings, I lead a lot of meetings, I have a lot of commitments, there's a lot of things that keep me in the game. The quality comes from working with another female. I don't sponsor any men. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't. So all of my sponsees have been women and are women. And it's a game changer. They say that God doesn't bring two people together to just benefit one, right? So there's when God brings me in a sponsee, it's we're working together and I'm benefiting and vice versa, right? The paradox is that I help people to stay sober. And it's just I think especially during the fourth and fifth, the fifth step, this overwhelming feeling of gratitude and purpose. These girls are sharing with me like their lives, like some of the they've probably never shared this stuff with any other person in the on the planet, and they're sitting here talking to me about it. And I just feel this like I kind of just like get shocked. And I can take it, but it just I always feel, and even when we're just talking on the phone, like these girls like have chose me. Like this is a big deal. I'm not saving a soul. I've gotten past the fact that like what if I say this and if I say that? It's like it's not about that. I'm a spiritual advisor. I share my experience. I remind them, hey, there's no monopoly over God. So if I tell you something you don't like, you go to your higher power. I am not the end all be all. And so I think it's just sponsorship is that one thing that it's almost like everything is it gives you everything at once. It's more than just a meeting. It's more than just a phone call. It's more than just a lead. It's more than just service. It's the epitome of what we do, right? Like I the only reason that I get to stay this way is if I help other people get through the steps and everything like that. And it's like I genuinely believe there's this contract that I got into, right? This third step is that I'm going to do thy will. It's a primary purpose is to help other females. So as long as I'm sober, this is my vow, right? I've given this thing, and that's to help other women. And so regardless of what my home life looks like, regardless of what my financial situation looks like, if there is the ability to help somebody, a female, and sponsor them, I will sponsor them. It's priority for me. It's my primary purpose here, and I do believe there's not another thing that has ever I know I'm exactly where I need to be when I'm working with a sponsee. There's when you feel like you are doing the right thing, there is just a feeling of um, you're doing God. I'm in God's will. You know what I mean? It's just this purpose of why I'm here. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Is when I'm sponsoring another alcoholic.
Yeah, I love that. What are your goals for the next year? I mean, you mentioned you go to 4 or 5 meetings a day. That's amazing. I guess before I ask you like what your next recovery goals are, I just want to ask like, have you always stayed that connected? Has that been consistent?
Yes. Yes, the funny, I'd rather be in a meeting than not. And so, because of the flexibility, I'm a caregiver, I'm at home, the way that I space out my days, allows me, an hour, 4 hours, whatever it is, an hour meeting. But the thing is that I keep getting invited to new meetings and I really like the meetings. And so I feel I want to keep going. Like I feel like I have 4 or 5 home groups because, and Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. I love that meeting. I go every morning in person at 6 a.m. There's a 7 a.m. meeting that I adore. There's a new 8 to 9 meeting that I love. Fountain Valley from noon to 1, internationals from 1 to 2, my women's meeting from 4 to 5, and then I usually have an evening meeting or I'm in service to my area. And so they call it service junkie, and I don't know if I don't really like the way that sounds. I just enjoy being with you guys. I enjoy being in meetings. I enjoy the atmosphere. I enjoy the way it feels. I enjoy the fact that I show up and I know that I'm supposed to be there for a reason, whether it's to connect with somebody one on one or just hear a message.
Yeah, and I actually just thought of something else I want to ask you real quick, Kelly. I see a lot of your art that you make on Instagram and stuff. How is that came about? Does that like part of your recovery? Does that, is that just hobby of yours? How does that play out?
So I've always been an artist in some capacity. I've always enjoyed sketching, or I've taken some art classes. Um, you could say so. Some of the glass work that I do. So I do believe I was going through some manic episodes. So there's a lot of energy, and it just came out. I had a mirror that was old, and I wanted to do some form of a like a tile work, or I don't know what you call it, mosaics. And I found out about glass was super cheap. And so I started doing it, and it's very therapeutic. I don't, when I'm doing some form of art, my thoughts subside, the racing thoughts subside. And it's a form of meditation for me. I do things very alcoholically, everything that I do. I mean, those pieces were taking me 18 hours, 22 hours, and I was going nonstop, waking up early to start them again. That's kind of subsided because I think the mania has subsided. So, you know, a lot of the things that I do artistically shows up in the form of my mental health. Like I feel like it just grounds me. It keeps me busy. Like I said, sketching or doodling or doing some sort of glass work, it just keeps me busy. And for me, from time to time, I need that. I just need something to just kind of like keep me focused.
Yeah, and I feel that's so important. It's like finding, because I remember when I first got sober, it's like I remember people asking me in sober living and stuff like, "Hey man, like what do you like to do for fun?" and stuff like that, and it's like for 13, 14 years all I did was drugs and alcohol, and it's like I had to kind of discover like who I was as a person, what I was interested in, what I like to do as hobbies. Did you, was that the same way for you as well, kind of discovering yourself when you first got sober?
The funny thing is that my art in my addiction was always when I was loaded. I never did it as serenity or peace or anything like that. Um, it's funny. I remember asking my mom, I was like, did you think I was going to be like this? Like, am I different? And she's like, no. She's like, you're just the Kelly before all the drugs and alcohol. Like, I don't even think I needed to find myself in this program. I think my identity just came with this program. I think that, um, you know, everything that I do is in some capacity to help others, right? Because if I'm working on myself and I'm drawing or I'm doing art, everything is luckily, in sobriety is for healthy reasons, right? Everything that I do is for, mental health or for clarity or to help other people. I do a lot of artwork for people. It's always about something of unity or recovery based. And it's like, that's who I am, and like I said, my mom said, you've always been Kelly. We can just see you now. Like you're the same one. You're the same Kelly that, before your addiction. You're just sober. Um, I think that the funny thing is that I think I'm so different because nobody knows what I'm thinking or how I process things. I just act a certain way, which seems normal to people. But for me, I'm still processing myself. Well, I'm still processing those first thoughts and everything like that. So in a roundabout way, I just think I found myself through the 12 steps.
Yeah, and that's so cool. I can definitely relate to that. I've had you here for almost an hour, Kelly. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think there's going to be a lot of people, especially women, they're going to love hearing from you on here, and is there anything else that you want to say just to anyone that is maybe thinking about sobriety, maybe someone that has tried it before and failed? Do you have any last words, advice to someone that hasn't fully made the dive into recovery but is contemplating it, is thinking about it?
Yeah, I'll wrap the end with this is you got to find out if you belong here, right? In Bill's story, I just read one of Bill's story. If you have suffered from alcoholic torture, which means you've burnt things to the ground, right? Finances, relationships, work, anything and everything, right? Your alcoholic torture, you burn it to the ground. You have to believe and understand that your body is as different as your mind, right? Or we have an allergy to the body and the obsession of the mind. Find out if you belong here, because if you don't belong here, you're not going to do this thing, right? So it's um, ask yourself 3 questions to find out if you belong here. If you're not drinking or you've stopped drinking, can you stay stopped? That's the obsession. If you start drinking, can you stop? That's the allergy, right? Do you have the choice to stop drinking? Do you drink when you don't want to drink, right? Those are 3 questions to determine. If you've answered all 3, you're most likely an alcoholic, right? You no longer have the choice to drink. You are an alcoholic. If you start drinking, you can't stop. Just accept it. Accept the fact that you're an alcoholic and you don't have the power, and that's okay. The powerlessness is what gives you the paradox again is you give up control to gain it, right? Like everything, just surrender to this thing. Another thing too is that this 12-step thing doesn't need to take you a year. They do step studies. You can get through 1, 2, and 3 in one night, right? Find out what you suffer from. Find out if you belong here. Be willing, and then take the 3rd step and try to find a guiding power that will help you through the rest of the steps. Find out if you belong here. Hook up with people that you like. Find trudging buddies. Find a sponsor and give it a shot. And it's I'll end kind of on this message. Like, you can't write what you're going to ask, like what's going to happen in a year or anything. It's like I can't write any of this stuff anymore. If you guys asked me to write where I would be in 4 years, I would have. I would have been so far off. I would be back in banking, on a home, the finance, right? All of the tangible stuff that I was after. And now it's all spiritual. It's giving back. It's service. It's helping my family. It's living amends and all that kind of stuff. And so I work. I do the footwork and I leave the results to God. And that's how I live today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much again, Kelly. You're amazing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Drew.